He acts cold, distant, disconnected. But what if I told you that silence isn't absence? That emotional withdrawal, that I don't care demeanor, what if that's actually the clearest evidence that he's madly in love and he doesn't even know how to survive it? And let me explain something that will flip your understanding of avoidant love on its head. An avoidant man doesn't express love with closeness. He expresses it through avoidance. And I know that sounds completely irrational, but that's because love to an avoidant isn't pleasure. It's danger. It's exposure. It's vulnerability. And nothing terrifies him more than vulnerability, because in his mind, vulnerability equals abandonment, humiliation, loss of control. So when he starts to catch real soul-wrenching feelings for you, he doesn't lean in. He pulls away. He retreats into a fortress of coldness because the heat of intimacy is burning his emotional wiring. You think his silence means he doesn't care. No, that silence is a scream he's been trained to suppress his entire life. This isn't about playing games. This is a trauma reflex, a psychological mechanism he developed probably long before he met you. Maybe he had parents who weren't emotionally available. Maybe he was punished or rejected for being expressive. Maybe at some point love became a currency he could never afford to spend safely. So what does he do when the feelings rise? He runs, not from you, but from himself. Now let's go deeper, philosophically. Most people believe love is about closeness, but for the avoidant, closeness is claustrophobia. It feels like a trap. Love becomes a mirror, and that mirror reflects his inadequacies, his inability to give, his hidden shame. So to avoid being exposed, to avoid feeling not enough, he creates emotional distance. And you think he's indifferent, but he's not. He's just terrified of being seen in full light. Here's where it gets fascinating and heartbreaking. The more he feels, the more he pulls away. It's backwards. The more important you become, the more emotionally dangerous you become in his mind. His nervous system goes into high alert. You become the epicenter of everything he craves and everything he fears. That's why his love doesn't look like pursuit. It looks like paralysis. Now, if you're emotionally secure, this will feel like rejection. It will feel like abandonment. You'll be tempted to chase him, to pull him out of that silence, to demand answers. But let me challenge you with something radical. What if his silence isn't the absence of love, but the overflow of it? Think about this. Have you ever cared so much about something that it scared you, that it made you hesitate before diving in because you knew it had the power to change you? That's what's happening here, except it's happening in someone who doesn't have the tools to sit with that fear. So instead of engaging with it, he shuts down, he becomes the iceberg, and you only see the tip, but under the surface, there's an entire emotional ocean he's suppressing just to survive. Let's bring this into practical reality. When he goes silent, it's not always strategic. It's not always manipulation. In many cases, it's emotional self-defense. He's overwhelmed. He's trying to regulate feelings he's never learned how to hold. And ironically, it's the women he cares about the most who trigger this shutdown response. Because if he didn't care, he wouldn't need to protect himself. There's no threat in indifference, but love, that's dangerous. That's explosive. That's unpredictable. And so he freezes. You want to know how madly he loves you? Don't just listen to his words. Watch what happens when you disappear. Watch what happens when you stop chasing. That's when the avoidance armor starts to crack. Not because you forced anything, but because the silence you gave him mirrored his own, and he could finally hear how loud his feelings actually were. Here's the truth that hurts. He may never admit it. He may never put it into words, but that coldness you feel, that shutdown, that's not the absence of love. That's the weight of it. Too heavy for him to carry out loud. And if you're the one feeling confused, feeling abandoned, feeling like you did something wrong, remember this. His silence is not your fault. His distance is not a verdict on your worth. It's a reflection of a love he doesn't know how to manage. So instead of trying to break through that coldness with desperation, hold your frame, stay centered, let his silence speak volumes. Because when a man like that truly loves you, he won't say it with flowers or poetry. He'll say it by panicking in your absence, by unraveling in his solitude, and by finally realizing that love didn't break him. Running from it did. Don't confuse cold behavior with a cold heart. Sometimes the coldest man in the room is the one burning inside the most. You think he's gone because he doesn't text. You think he's over it because he's not reaching out. But what if I told you he's more present than ever? Not in your inbox, not on your phone, but in the shadows of your digital life, lurking, watching, obsessing. An avoidant in love doesn't stalk you the way a secure man would. He doesn't pick up the phone, say, I miss you, and ask to see you. That would require vulnerability. That would require him to admit his emotional dependence on. He doesn't have to risk the exposure of actually showing up. Love becomes surveillance, connection through control. Now let me be clear, this isn't healthy, but it's real, it's human, and it's what happens when someone has intense emotions bottled inside a nervous system that's terrified of being seen. In fact, the more he watches you, the more internally trapped he becomes. Because every time he sees you smiling, glowing, living without him, a war ignites inside him. One side says, see, she's fine without you. Good thing you didn't open up. The other side screams, why aren't you with her? What the hell are you doing? That internal war is emotional torment. And the battlefield, it's often his scream. Now let's get even more real. Just because he doesn't speak to you doesn't mean you've stopped mattering. If you didn't matter, he wouldn't be watching. He wouldn't be checking. He wouldn't be stalking. Indifference is silent and still. Obsession is silent but active. Relentlessly active. You don't check someone's Instagram at 3 a.m. unless you're haunted by what you lost. You don't open their old messages unless you're addicted to a version of connection you don't know how to recreate. So when an avoidant is in love but scared, he doesn't act like he misses you. He monitors you. It's covert, it's quiet, but it's also suffocating him. Now here's the ironic tragedy. He's looking at you, waiting for a sign, some clue that he's still safe to love you, some evidence that you haven't fully left emotionally. And while he's doing that, you're waiting for him to come forward. Two people stuck, paralyzed by fear, dying for connection, but too scared to be the first to move. That's the silent heartbreak of avoidant love. Let's go philosophical. In Plato's Symposium, the philosopher Aristophanes tells the myth that humans were once whole, the two people fused into one, and love is the desperate desire to return to that original unity. Avoidants want that unity too, but they've been conditioned to fear what they long for. So when they start feeling whole around someone, they panic. And instead of moving closer, they monitor from afar, as if watching you can give them the feeling of love without the risk of loss. But love doesn't work that way. Love requires exposure. Love demands presence. And the longer he stays in the shadows, the more he loses you, not because he stopped caring, but because he was too afraid to act on how deeply he did. And here's the kicker. The moment you stop broadcasting your life, the moment you stop showing up online or giving digital cues, he doesn't feel relief, he feels panic. Because now he has no access, no data, no illusion of connection. That silence, that's when the fantasy breaks. That's when the obsession turns into regret. That's when the feelings he suppressed come flooding up. Because the only thing louder than your presence is your absence. So if you're sitting there wondering if he's forgotten you, hear me loud and clear. A man who forgets doesn't stalk. A man who's indifferent doesn't keep checking. And a man who's free doesn't need to monitor the one he left. His digital presence is a ghost of the love he never delivered. And if you felt it, if your instincts told you he's still emotionally attached, trust that. Your nervous system knows the truth before your mind can explain it. Because love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's watching from a distance. Sometimes it's a grown man who still can admit that he fell in love and then ran. Don't confuse silence with absence. Sometimes the one who vanishes the loudest is the one who never truly left. You want to know the truth about an avoidant man in love? Don't listen to what he says. Don't even pay attention to what he writes. Watch his eyes. Because his eyes will betray the very feelings his words are built to hide. We live in a culture that overemphasizes verbal expression, texting, calling, explaining. And yet the most powerful emotional signals are nonverbal. The body doesn't lie. The voice can lie, the mouth can lie, but the eyes, they're raw data. They're soul deep broadcast towers. And when an avoidant man starts falling in love, his eyes become the first thing he loses control over. Here's why. When he looks at you, he's not just seeing you. He's confronting everything he wants and everything he's terrified to reach for. Love, connection, intimacy, all of it reflected back in your presence. And so what does he do? He avoids eye contact, or he gives you a glance that's just a little too intense and then instantly looks away. And that right there, that flicker, that half-second moment, that's where the truth leaks out. Because in that moment, his brain and body are in conflict. His heart is wide open, screaming, "She matters," but his nervous system is slamming on the brakes. That's not coldness, that's emotional overload. You're witnessing a man emotionally short-circuiting under the weight of feelings he's never learned how to carry. Let's go deeper. Avoidant attachment isn't just about fear of intimacy, it's about fear of exposure. When he looks at you for too long, you become a mirror. And what do mirrors do? They reflect. And if he's not emotionally equipped, that reflection becomes unbearable. He doesn't just see you, he sees himself, and not the version he wants to show the world. He sees the child who was rejected, the man who feels not enough. It's the person terrified that if you see all of them, you'll leave. So he breaks eye contact. Not because he's indifferent, but because he cares so damn much, he can't hold your gaze without unraveling. And that unraveling, that's where the truth hides. This is why the most emotionless men often have the deepest emotional reservoirs. They've just locked it all behind guarded eyes, but every so often they slip. You say something that hits too close to home. You lean in with kindness instead of pressure. You walk away and don't beg, and in that moment, you'll catch it, the flash of longing in his eyes, that split-second vulnerability, that unguarded naked moment. So that's love leaking through the cracks in his walls. You'll notice it most when he thinks you're not paying attention. Those moments of quiet observation, when you're doing something small, laughing with someone else, focused on your phone, adjusting your hair, he'll look at you like he's memorizing you. And then, the second you catch him, boom, the mask snaps back on, he turns his head, he changes the subject, he pretends he wasn't even looking, but he was. That's how you know. The man who doesn't care, doesn't flinch when he's seen. But the man who's falling, he hides. Because the truth in his eyes terrifies him. It makes it real. It makes it undeniable. And he's not ready to let love become real, because real love would force him to confront everything he's buried. It's not just fear of loving you, it's fear of what loving you reveals about him. Now, philosophically, let's step back. The eyes are often referred to as the windows to the soul. That's not poetic fluff, it's neuroscience. Emotional arousal dilates pupils. Nervous system responses create micro-expressions that flash across the face in milliseconds. You can't fake it, you can't suppress it fast enough. That's why you feel something when you look into someone's eyes who is holding back emotion. They're leaking the truth. And truth is magnetic. So if you're trying to make sense of an avoidant man's behavior, stop listening for big words. Look for small cracks. Look for the hesitation before he speaks. Look for the softness that shows up only when he forgets to be guarded. Look for the eyes that dart away the second yours become too focused. That's where the real story's being told. Here's what's tragic though. Many women miss this. They assume he doesn't care because he's not expressive. They assume his distance means disinterest. They never realize that the most powerful emotion in the room is the one he can't express and the one he won't admit. But if you've ever looked at a man and felt something you couldn't explain, something that didn't match his actions or his words, trust that. Your intuition picked up on what logic couldn't. You saw through the cracks in the armor. You saw the flicker in his eyes when he let the mask drop for just a moment. And if you saw it, even once, it was real. The truth is simple. His mouth may lie, his actions may confuse, but his eyes will always tell you when his heart is already surrendered. He acts like he's unaffected, like your silence means nothing, like he's moved on without a second thought. But then, when you least expect it, he appears. A text, a comment, a sudden like on your post after weeks, maybe months of disappearing. It seems random, right? But it's not. That moment is actually a crack in his emotional armor. That's not coincidence. That's suppressed feelings breaking through the surface. When an avoidant man reaches out after distance, it's not casual, it's calculated panic. It's a moment where his internal equilibrium is shaken by the weight of your absence. Because here's what happens. Avoidants don't feel the full intensity of love in presence. They feel it in absence. The moment you stop showing up, when you stop reaching out, when your energy truly leaves the room, that's when he begins to feel the full emotional impact of what he's lost. But remember, he's not wired to process these emotions directly. He doesn't know how to say, I miss you. He doesn't even know how to admit to himself that he's craving you. So instead, he masks it. He pops up subtly. He throws you a breadcrumb. Just checking in. Hope you're well. Or maybe even silence with a digital nudge, a like, a reaction, a message unsent. Why? Because those tiny gestures give him proximity without vulnerability. It's his way of testing the emotional temperature without risking full exposure. And don't be fooled. He didn't just think of you in that moment. He's been thinking of you every single day since the connection shifted, but he's been fighting it. Avoidants fight their feelings. With silence, with denial, with distraction, they delay the emotional bill, but the debt always comes due. And when it hits hard. And that's when he resurfaces, not because he figured it all out, but because your absence became louder than his fear. There's a dangerous misconception we need to break. We're conditioned to believe that silence equals indifference. But with an avoidance, silence often equals overwhelm. He's not ghosting because he doesn't care. He's ghosting because he cares too much and doesn't have the tools to navigate that emotional intensity. So he escapes, but here's the paradox. He's only free when you're close. Once you walk away, the avoidance collapses, the fantasy of control shatters, and now he's spiraling. Let's zoom in on the psychology here. Avoidant attachment is built on a deep-rooted belief. If I get too close, I'll get hurt. If I show my needs, I'll be rejected. So when you stop reaching out, his first instinct is relief. Good, I avoided the trap. But as time goes on and you stay silent, something changes. The nervous system begins to feel the weight of disconnect. He starts to wonder, did she really move on? Is she done with me? Did I push her too far? That's when the anxiety begins. You were never the threat. His own feelings were, and when you remove yourself from the equation, those feelings no longer have a container. They rise, they leak, they demand action. So he reaches out. But here's the mistake people make. They assume that moment of contact is confidence. No. It's confession through cowardice. It's I miss you wearing a mask. And here's where it gets even deeper. That reach out is not just about reconnecting, it's about reclaiming emotional control. If he can reinsert himself into your life, even for a moment, he soothes the panic. It's not always about love in the romantic sense. Sometimes it's about calming the war inside him. Because you became a part of his emotional regulation system, whether he admits it or not. But let me be clear, just because he reaches out doesn't mean he's ready. He might not be prepared to do the work, to face the fear, to love you fully. That's the painful part. He wants relief, but he might not be able to give you resolution. He wants the connection without the cost, but love doesn't work that way, not sustainably. So when he pops up, don't fall for the fantasy. Don't confuse the ping with a promise. Ask yourself, is he showing up as a man or just a shadow of the boy still running from his heart? Because just like the silence reveals the truth, so does the return. And if you're on the receiving end of this sudden attention after a long silence, here's what I want you to remember. Your power wasn't in what you said, it was in what you stopped saying. Your strength wasn't in chasing clarity, it was in becoming the mystery he couldn't solve. Your silence didn't push him away, it forced him to confront his truth. When he shows up out of nowhere, it's not proof he forgot you, it's proof he never could. One of the greatest signs that an avoidant man is emotionally attached, but terrified to admit it, is how he reacts to your independence. And I don't mean the kind of independence where you make your own money or drive your own car. I mean energetic independence, emotional autonomy. That moment when your life no longer revolves around his silence. That shift where you stop overthinking what he's thinking and start pouring into yourself, that's when everything changes. See, an avoidant man gets comfortable when he senses you're emotionally dependent. As long as you're the one reaching out, chasing, trying to fix the distance, he feels secure in the dynamic. Not loved necessarily, but in control. He doesn't have to step up emotionally because you're doing the emotional labor for both of you. It's a form of power for him, not malicious power, but protective power, power that guards him from having to feel too much, give too much, be too much. Worth Zen think, but the second that power starts to shift, even subtly, it triggers something deep inside him. Suddenly, you're not checking in as often, you're not reacting to his coldness, you're glowing, living, posting, with more light in your eyes than you did when you were entangled in his emotional avoidance. And here's what most people miss. He sees that. He senses it. Even if he's silent, even if he says nothing, even if he hasn't watched your story, he feels it. And what does he do? He doesn't come running with open arms and emotional clarity. That would require self-awareness. He does something far more subtle and more revealing. He gets irritated, triggered, passive-aggressive. He may even become colder. He may try to minimize your growth. Suddenly, the avoidant who seemed indifferent is now unnerved by your silence because the power dynamic shifted and now he doesn't know where he stands with you. Why? Because your independence disrupted the emotional script. This is a man who's emotionally programmed to believe that closeness equals loss of self. But when you detach, he starts to feel that loss for real. And instead of freedom, he experiences fear. It's confusing for him. On one hand, your independence is exactly what he thought he wanted. But on the other hand, it reveals just how emotionally tied he is to your presence, even if he's never admitted it. Now let's talk psychology. An avoidant's biggest fear isn't actually commitment, it's disempowerment. It's losing the emotional upper hand. It's being dependent on someone who might one day walk away. So when you begin to stand in your power, when your life starts moving without him, he's no longer the emotional anchor. And that unravels him. Because as much as he resisted connection, he built a quiet reliance on your energy. And now he feels the withdrawal. This is why so many avoidant men don't realize how deep their feelings go until the woman they kept at arm's length starts thriving without them. When she was chasing, begging, waiting, he could manage the dynamic. But when she detaches and glows up, that's when the emotional earthquake hits. That's when he starts spiraling, asking himself, was she really that valuable? Why does this feel like loss when I was the one pulling away? That internal conflict is everything. And if you want to understand where he stands emotionally, watch his behavior after you start pulling your energy back. Because if he suddenly becomes reactive, distant, or critical, it's not because he stopped caring. It's because your emotional autonomy is shining a light on the parts of him he's not ready to face. And here's what's so powerful. You didn't do this by force. You didn't beg for change. You didn't demand answers. You simply returned to yourself. You focused inward. You chose peace over performance. And in doing so, you flipped the emotional script. And he felt the shift like a punch to the soul. Now, does that mean he's ready? No. Avoidants rarely leap forward in those moments. But what you've done is disrupt his narrative. You've proven that love doesn't mean chasing, that connection doesn't require collapse, that you are the source of your own glow, and if he wants to experience your presence again, he'll have to meet you differently. Not as the version of you who shrank to fit his comfort zone, but as the woman who rose in silence on her own terms. That is the ultimate emotional mirror. And most men, especially avoidants, don't realize what they had until that mirror disappears. Until your energy is no longer orbiting around them. Until your light no longer bends to keep them comfortable. That's when the truth surfaces, not because you pushed it, but because you stopped. An avoidant man's reaction to your independence doesn't expose your value, it exposes his emotional investment. If your silence shakes him, he was already deeper in than he ever admitted. When an avoidant man starts to feel real, vulnerable, terrifying love, he doesn't celebrate it. He doesn't lean in with open arms, he fights it. And not in the way you might expect. He doesn't just pull away. He begins to devalue you. He starts convincing himself that you're not as special as you really are, not as irreplaceable, not as important, not because it's true, but because he's trying to survive the fire you lit inside him. You have to understand this is not about logic, it's about psychological survival. This man has likely spent years, maybe even his entire life, building an emotional firewall to protect himself from the vulnerability of love. That firewall tells him, if I need her, I lose power. If I love her, I lose control. If she gets too close, she could destroy me. So the moment he starts to feel like you matter too much, his nervous system hits the red alert. And when a man like this goes into emotional panic, he doesn't just shut down. He starts rewiring the story in his head to make you seem smaller so his feelings don't feel so big. This is where the confusion hits you. One day, you're everything. The connection is deep, intense, magnetic. He says things that reveal how much he's into you, maybe not directly, but through moments of tenderness, eye contact, the way he shows up in unexpected ways. And then, the next day, he's cold, distant, maybe even passive-aggressive. And worse, he starts behaving in ways that make you question your worth. He talks to other women, he avoids your messages, he becomes sarcastic, dismissive, even cruel, and you're left spinning. What did I do wrong? But the truth is, it's not about you. It's about what you awakened in him. See, when love becomes too real for an avoidant, he enters what psychologists call a deactivation strategy. He starts scanning you for flaws, starts telling himself a story that lets him withdraw emotionally while convincing himself it's justified. She's too much. She's not what I thought. She's moving too fast. That's not logic, it's defense, it's emotional damage control. He's trying to kill the attachment before it kills his illusion of safety. And this might sound manipulative, but it's actually tragic. Because what he's really doing is fighting his own vulnerability by rewriting the narrative around you. He's not pushing you away because he doesn't care. He's pushing you away because you're the first thing that ever made him care this much. And in his world, caring is dangerous. Let's talk philosophy for a moment. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "We are afraid not of the truth, but of what it means to feel the truth." That's the avoidant dilemma in a single line. The truth is, he loves you. The deeper truth, that love makes him feel powerless. So instead of surrendering to it, he rewrites the script to make you the problem. It's a desperate attempt to shrink the intensity of what he's feeling. And the more powerful you are, the more triggered he becomes. Because in his subconscious, love equals danger. So if he can convince himself you're not worth the risk, he doesn't have to face the terrifying possibility that you are. Now here's what's even more mind-bending. While he's trying to convince himself you don't matter, he's thinking about you nonstop. He's still checking your presence online. He's still replaying memories. He's still obsessed with what you're doing. Why? Because love isn't logic. Love never submits to the stories the mind creates. His heart is in, but his mind is fighting to escape. And the more he tries to suppress it, the deeper the emotional grip becomes. That's why he can devalue you publicly and still spiral when he thinks you've moved on. That's why he can ignore your texts, but break down the moment you stop reaching out. That's why he can act like he doesn't care until the silence becomes deafening and the guilt eats him alive. So if you've ever felt blindsided by an avoidant man's sudden shift from connection to cruelty, understand this. It was never about your value. It was about his inability to handle the intensity of what he felt for you. He minimized you in an attempt to minimize his emotional risk. But love doesn't get smaller just because you refuse to look at it. It grows in the dark, it takes root in silence, and eventually, it demands to be felt. Here's what I want you to take with you. If a man has to devalue you to feel safe, he's already exposed how much power you had over his heart. The ones who fight the hardest to forget you are the ones who never will. When a man tries to shrink your worth, it's often because your presence stretched his heart in ways he was never ready for. And that's not your burden to fix.